Our recent AI Trust webinar tackled an uncomfortable contradiction. If we can't trust AI, why do we keep wanting more of it? The conversation featured Martin Stewart Weeks from Public Purpose, who works with governments deploying AI in high-stake environments, and Satya from St Vincent de Paul Society, New South Wales, who navigates AI where vulnerable people can't afford mistakes, together with Liam Hoffman, head of AI at the Strategy Group. They challenged each other on regulation, questioned whether human in the loop still means anything, debated on who should be setting the rules, and asked whether we're genuinely transforming or just performing innovation. The live chat didn't hold back either. One attendee admitted trusting ChatGPT more than the Australian government. Another called the whole AI race a Faustian bargain. The panel's conclusion was deceptively simple. Maybe we don't need to trust the machine. We need to trust the humans who deploy it, govern it, and know when to override it. But that answer only raises harder questions. We've distilled the sharpest tensions from the webinar and chat into 7 provocative questions. These are not rhetorical. They're the conversations organizations need to be having honestly before their next AI initiative, not after it fails. And I'm now joined by Martin and Satya to explore some of these questions. Welcome, Satya and Martin. And Martin, you were just telling us about a webinar, an article that you just read. Do you want to tell us what you were
just very
thinking?
quickly, you know what happens. You keep reading all this stuff. I was
You
out
do.
early this morning with the dog, having a walk, listening to a podcast. The podcast is called Hard Fork, Fork. You've got to be careful how you say that in a hurry, from the New York Times. And it was an interview with the folks who were behind the release of Gemini Pro 3,
Yeah.
which I've certainly discovered recently and having a lot of fun with. Demis
Yeah.
Hassabis was one of them from DeepMind. And it suddenly occurred to me that these are folks, brilliant folks, clearly, deeply immersed in a venture that has a set of rules that's almost completely separate from the kind of way I live. They are engaged in the most, I'm sure, consuming and energizing and just incredible experimentation and journey into this new territory. The notion that they should be somehow working, as it were, at a pace and in a way that has a focus on things like safety and ethics and all the rest of it. I'm sure they are concerned about those issues, but it's sort of 2 separate universes almost. And when we spoke in our earlier conversation, which was a terrific discussion and a great set of responses, I agree, about this idea of perhaps being sensibly anxious about the way this is all developing. I was listening to these guys this morning thinking, blimey, they are literally living in a universe that it's certainly separate from the way I calculate the way life should go. So I think that's a bit of an issue at the moment. We do have these 2 worlds, the experimenters, the developers, the innovators, and then there's the rest of us who are beginning to try to make some sense of this world. And I think the disconnect between these 2 universes is quite an issue.
So it's a really good point, man. So if we've got this universe out there of people in Google and Meta and so on, and then you've got enterprise and organizations such as governments and not-for-profits trying to do pilots and finding that 95% of those pilots fail to scale. So the question is, are we investing in transformation or are we just mucking about with expensive experimentation? So, one of the participants noted that the simple wins are already with the people who figured it out. And then does that mean that everyone else is just performing innovation theatre?
Satya, what do you reckon?
I think it's an overly simplistic way of sort of framing what's happening in the world today. Yes, there is always going to be a theatrical element to anything that happens. I mean, you don't need to go far back. You look at agile evangelists that we all saw, in the last decade alone. Before that was business architecture. So every decade or half a decade has these theatrics and these performative ideas that sort of play out in the public sphere. The reality is the benefits don't sit with individuals that can be scaled. AI has a promise, and and I want to say here very specifically, the commoditized version of AI, which is your ChatGPT, your Claude for Enterprise, they have the potential for productivity scaling. And that scaling doesn't just happen with one or two hyperscaling and these super users. It happens when it can be standardized and deployed in a sensible way for that productivity gain to be unlocked. So there's that world of commoditized AI that is very much relevant for organizations to consider. Like, think of RPAs, or robotics, automated processing. There are just so many componentries that are available for enterprises to tap into to create that productivity gain. But I want to stop and sort of really address what Martin said, because I wasn't walking my dog, Martin. I was making lunches for my kids this morning, and I started listening to The Diary of the CEO, and this is a conversation with Stuart Russell. And I landed pretty much in a similar mindset as yourself. There's the gap between the two worlds, the commoditized AI that enterprises and us as individuals are interacting with. And there are these frontier innovators and researchers who are racing towards, AGI, which is a world that is very scary. And the most scariest part of it is not whether they get there and what time they get there. It's just that desperate, burning passion these few frontier organizations have, despite the risk it creates for society as a whole, for human existence.
Yes.
And nobody's pausing, and the governments aren't pausing to put some guardrails and put some handbrakes.
Yeah, that's a great point. Gosh, you've raised some really good points, Jeff. If I could just pick up a couple.
Of course.
One of which is we might actually explore the notion about whether this has always been true about the way innovation plays out. But let's come back to that in just a minute, because I have a feeling that this is a very, very deep pattern that we've seen time and time and time again. But come back to it and why it seems to be so unsettling and unnerving at the moment. But yes, I think your kind of observations is right, that we've often confronted the situation where these innovations don't start to get really serious until they start to get deeply embedded in workflows and the way organizations work and all the rest of it. There is a performative element always. There's a kind of, wow, this is fun. It's all very jazzy, and sort of we are sort of, what's the word? We're sort of mesmerized by the sheer magic of it all. And that's fine. And it's sort of, but that's like eating sort of candy floss. The substance, the nutritious part of all of this starts to happen. I'm not sure if that analogy keeps going, but never mind. The nutritious part of this starts to be when it seeps deep into the way organizations actually work. And that seems to be a lesson we're learning again. But it did occur to me, you go back to inventing, motor cars and inventing aeroplanes and, almost any sort of electronics and what have you, right back to the Industrial Revolution and so on and so forth. Isn't it always perhaps the case that to some extent our inventors and innovators are fired up by this astonishing sort of blinkered but amazing energy to kind of create the stuff? They literally cannot see anything else except the thing they want to bring into the world. And, in some ways, good luck. And, we've benefited, haven't we, from many of those. The question, it seems to me, is the extent to which we can match that with an appropriate and a robust kind of set of guardrails, if you like what is the control mechanism? And I think what's happening at the moment, I sense, perhaps it's more personal than anything else, this stuff is not under anyone's control. It's not even under their control. Like, they literally have no idea the forces that they are unleashing. And when I heard Demis Hassabis this morning, except the interview was about 3 weeks ago, just on the verge of the announcement of Gemini Pro 3, say, yep, 5 to 10 years, AGI, couple of breakthroughs we've still got to work on. And by the way, we're working on those, at which point I suppose I'm supposed to feel, oh, well, that's okay. Google's working on his 5 to 10 year framework. And I'm thinking, what I heard was somebody who is on the sort of, on the downhill ski slope. And it's like, there's no brakes on this thing. There's no bloody brakes. We are just going for it. Sorry, Jeff.
So if that's the case, let's pull this discussion back to trust.
Yeah.
If we've got all this happening, everyone's racing, and as someone said um, in the webinar, are we running an AI race? We might win, but we actually shouldn't. Uh,
Yeah.
is it either overtax the engine to win the race? They said, but risk the whole thing blowing up. But what's even more concerning, Martin and Satya, is this sort of human in the loop becoming fiction? And the comment that was raised in the webinar was when we've got multiple agents all interacting with each other. Where exactly does meaningful human oversight occur? And are we already past that point? So can we anymore really intervene, or is that just fiction?
I
I
mean, go ahead, Satya, please.
I have a view, and it's formed based on experience and sort of reading and listening. And it really is, as we've come to learn, and through our education system, there's the before Christ and after Christ. We're in a very similar point in time in this era right now. It's before AGI and after AGI. I think before AGI, there is an opportunity to build trust by having humans in the loop. To the earlier conversation we had, trust the people who are governing and regulating and checking the work, the critical decision points from a AI output. And there is after AGI, where human in the loop, to the listener's point, is irrelevant because
Yeah.
it's all thinking, self-sufficient entity that can make
Yeah.
decisions for itself. And early research has found, based on what I was listing, is that self-preservation is one of its key objectives. So this whole idea of mission impossible that we see, um, the hero going and sort of unplugging the switch, which is a very common myth, that is not a reality when we live in the world that is driven by AGI. So it comes down to before AGI, absolutely, human in the loop is very relevant for an organization to deploy AI, having critical checkpoints that are human led when you're making a decision about a case, when you're triaging some information that has a direct impact on your end customer. It is absolutely valid and should be deeply considered when deploying AI at scale.
So, but Satya, you've got me really, really worried now. You talk about making lunch for
Welcome
your
to our world.
children, and
Welcome to
and
Martin and
lunch
my world.
and lunch for my grandchildren. I mean, I think if that's the case, then trust is going to break down completely, because we don't even know who we're talking to. We're not even in the loop anymore. And if trust breaks down, you can see what happens globally when trust breaks down. People start getting metal cylinders with explosives and start firing them at each other over borders. How will our kids and grandkids live in a world where trust no longer exists because we have no idea who we're actually talking to or who's talking
Yeah.
about us or any of it?
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, what is the foundations, isn't it? Is visibility. We need to know see what's going on, and some sense of accountability. And it seems to me the current world is playing with the accountability story in ways that are very unsettling. I mean, really unsettling. Literally, who do you go to? Where do you go when you need to get some form of redress? And if this system that we're building is so opaque as to, frankly, who is taking what decision or what kind of what kind of entity at all is taking what kind of decision, and how on earth do you hold a machine accountable, and so on and so forth, all the stuff that people are talking about. You do have to start anyway to entertain some of those slightly more apocalyptic kind of views that various people I know, including Jeff Hinton and various other of the luminaries of this world, have said, oh my God, what have we born here? What have we brought into the world? Which perhaps they also thought when they invented the atomic bomb, which is sort of comparable at one level, except of course the atomic bomb couldn't think for itself. The atomic bomb literally could do nothing unless a human was in that loop. Someone had to invent it and make it and put it in the plane and a pilot and so on and so forth. You get my point. The atomic bomb can't launch itself, although of course soon it will be able to do that.
True.
They will be
Very
able to do
true.
that. And you look around, you look at the story, and I'm only very tangentially following this at a great distance, but every now and then I see this conversation about the way this is playing out in the world of warfare. In fact, we're seeing that right every day with Ukraine and so on, and their use of drones and what have you. It's in a way, it's an amazing story. But it's like, okay, oops, all these inanimate objects are going to start thinking for themselves very shortly.
Absolutely. So
that's an issue.
And-
That is an issue, it
and I
seems to
think
me.
The listener in the webinar, actually, one of the comments was, I trust AI more than I trust the government.
exactly, yeah.
That is very symptomatic of the world that we're in right now. It is as scary and as dystopian as it gets. But what's happened is, the misinformation and disinformation campaigns were, as early as 1800s. Books were being published about witchcraft, and there was a whole lot of people who were persecuted as a result of it. But there was a level of containment, geographical limitations, logistical limitations, language barriers. We are in a world where kids, very young kids, adults, and mature individuals are getting influenced. Their way of thinking is being influenced because there's so much information pollution now. So this idea of trust is inherently being threatened, because as we were growing up, CNN, BBC, they were absolute sources of truth. If they're saying it, there's an element of truth to it. And we took that for granted. However, with these micro news blogging that's happening through social media, the AI companions that are being released, we are increasingly seeing this whole idea of trust shift, and the agency that we put into the traditional media is disappearing. There is no one viable source of truth, or there are no 2 or 3 viable sources of truth. Truth is whatever I interpret it to be, because of my algorithm feeding me consistently 10 videos that look authentic, but could be a big campaign of misinformation. So
well, indeed, it's happening, isn't it, every day?
it is. So to me, there's a bigger debate about how do we perceive trust in the world of today as individuals with agency.
Yeah. Look, just yesterday I was using the new version of Opus 4.5 from Anthropic, and it produced for me a 25-page report, beautifully written, color, graphics really nicely laid out, table of contents, all of it. And I looked at it, and my first reaction was, this is fantastic. Look, I've just saved myself a day or 2 days to produce this 23-page, well-structured, well-written report. My first inclination was to go, I'm done. It's produced. It's finished. And then I thought to myself, I can't do that. Can I actually trust anything that's written in this beautifully formatted report that just looks wonderful? And there was a real push, because half of me said, I'm done. Let's move on to something else. But can I actually trust it?
There's an interesting observation I'd make about that. You're bringing to that conversation, if I can put it this way, a level of judgment and discernment. Frankly, I might even go as far as to say almost a moral framework that is a function of, if I can be polite about this, of your age and where you've lived and how long you've been in the world. You imagine my 3.5-year-old daughter. How is she going to learn how to even have the reaction you've just had if she's going to spend, I'm assuming, a large chunk of her life, which will go a long, long way beyond beyond when I'm dead? How is she going to learn that level of judgment and discernment in order to be able to even have the argument with herself about the nature of the output from this thing? Like, the reason you've had that is because of all the things you've hacked away at over your life with clever people, stupid people, brilliant reading you've done, mistakes you've made. You've honed that capacity for discernment and judgment by your own engagement with the world and the discernment you've learned by your own agency. This technology is basically offering to take all that off your plate. Don't worry about that. I'll fix all that.
Yes. Well,
Well,
that rem
yeah, not a good thing. That bothers me a lot. Sorry, Satya, I didn't mean to go
no,
on.
it reminds me of a executive workday that we attended. I'll not disclose the name of the company, and this company is a extension in a way of Anthropic Shop. And all they were doing was sharing how this organization's adopted Anthropic, how they've created digital twins of each of their executives. And the executives were there, the CEO, the co-founders were all there and go, we've created our digital twin, so our team or our direct reports can actually put in their performance management points there and get feedback from the digital twin long before they had to have a conversation with me.
Yep.
And it was a really a moment of pride and joy for them. So when we broke for lunch, they approached and we were having a chit chat, and I said, help me understand, how are you developing your leaders of tomorrow? So it's great your direct reports have this digital twin they can access for things. What about the intern? What about the graduate who's just joined your organization?
Yeah.
How are you building their resilience to have hard conversation, to receive hard feedback, to make tough decisions and stand behind them? And they could not answer me satisfactorily. And that is very analogous to how the world is working towards how to deal with trust and how to deal with AGI and how to deal with this. They're really passionate about running the race, but not necessarily having true discernment for the end outcome for the generations to come.
Exactly. I mean, the point we're making here, isn't it, all along, is that in the end, humans in the loop is fine, so long as those humans have got some level of discernment and agency and capability to make those judgments. If the very technology into which they're meant to be inserting themselves is essentially eroding their capacity to bring that level of discernment and judgment, what's the point of having them in the loop in the first place? Because they won't be able to do it. Like, how am I going to make judgments on that basis? Because I've had no capacity to build that capability as we've been going on. We're just going to have to, quote, trust the machine. I was interested, by the way, very quickly, great comment back on the LinkedIn post that you put up, Jeff, on this conversation from John Whittle, ex-Data 61. And John's concern was, no, we have to learn to trust the machines. We have to make these machines trustworthy. We can't just assume that humans are going to fix it. And I absolutely take his point. The problem is, in a sense, in our earlier instantiation of machine and human interaction, we didn't have to worry that we had to trust the aeroplane, or trust the car. Now we've got a technology where, in fact, it's so autonomous and it's so capable of its own agency that actually how much we trust it is, in fact, now a very, very serious part of this new conversation.
So what do we do?
We don't know its intentions, and we don't know how it reaches a decision point. That opacity.
What do we do? Yeah, is that your question?
Yeah. So what do we do? Slit our wrists?
Another glass of red
option
wine.
A, B, C.
No.
How do we? To your point, Martin, how do we bring trust back into the equation, given the fact that it's being eroded and eroded and eroded?
Well, let me kind of sort of begin to conclude. I know we haven't got a huge amount of time, and I'm sure we should keep this conversation going in other ways. I hope we can. I mean, I'm going to end my own thoughts perhaps with a bit more of a positive note, and that is, there's a very famous exchange of, I don't think it was letters or whatever, with Thomas Jefferson at the time of the American independence movement, where the argument was, oh gosh, you can't let all these, the great unwashed into this process. They're so stupid and they know nothing. And I mean, God, don't give them the chance to make the decisions. And his observation, and of course, I'm not going to get the quote right, was, no. What we've got to do is we have to educate their discernment. We have to give them the skills to be able to make those judgments. It wasn't just a sort of education thing, but it was, and I think to some extent, and I'm going to err on the side of optimism, largely because I am constantly thinking of my 3.5-year-old daughter and my grandchildren. We have to be able to give them a chance to build that level of discernment. We are going to have to find ways to educate and teach them to much the same way as we have with every generation as it's interacted with whatever the technology sort of boom and magic has been going on, the telephone, the fax machine, and so on. We've always had to educate that sense of discernment. I think it will be much tougher this time around, though, because the thing that we're interacting with is qualitatively different this time. But I'm going to put my hope and my optimism, and I am broadly optimistic, although sensibly anxious at times, to go back to our earlier construction, even if there are days when you wonder whether that frankly is enough. But I am going to put some store in our collective ability to build up a level of discernment and judgment and capability through learning and through guidance and all the rest of it, so that we can begin gradually to grapple with this thing that has rapidly gone much further than we thought. And we are going to have to gradually and carefully pull a little bit of that back. And I'm going to say we can balance the machine-human equation again, but it's going to be much, much tougher than it's ever been in the past.
Man, I love your optimism. Satya, what are your thoughts?
Two thoughts. One, I think government need to play a bigger role, a lot bigger than they're doing right now.
Completely.
It needs to go beyond the AI plan. Similar to, something as simple as we don't ever expect our financial advisor to not disclose the kind of commissions they're getting from the advice they're giving us, or our mortgage broker. It is not dissimilar to that. We need government to put guardrails around how this algorithm sort of calculations in a simpler way are taking place, and for whose benefit, even if it's not about the technicals of how things are happening. Whose benefit is this serving? So there's a government role that needs to play, and the government needs to step it up quite substantially and quite rapidly, given the pace of the innovation, as Martin mentioned. And I think the second one, very similar to what Martin said, we need to, as individuals and as organization, build discernment through education, because without that, the trust is going to become a very arbitrary construct very quickly.
Yeah, I agree. I have to say, it's a very obvious point, and it's always been true, hasn't it, to some extent, that the education system, the way we educate our children and ourselves, our learning systems, has always been at the center of these conversations. But my goodness, is it at the center of it now? And, I'd hesitate, perhaps we can pick this up another time. I suspect that education and learning system is really struggling at the moment. This is huge, and it's a really big remake, but it's right in the center of the conversation, I think.
It is, and I think it would be great. Let's pick that up another time, because you're right. It needs total revamp in the world of AI. So Satya, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for continuing the conversation, Martin. Always a pleasure. And
a pleasure. Thank you for pulling us together again.
I've really enjoyed the last half hour. I enjoyed the webinar, and there's so much that we can discuss in the future together. I very much look forward to that. So thank you both so much for joining me, and I've very much enjoyed taking this further. All the very best.
Great pleasure. Yeah, all the best to you. Thanks a lot.
Bye.